Hello. Welcome to BSD YouTube channel. This has been a long time coming. For those of you that don't know me or haven't seen me around, I've been writing for BSD for 8 years now, so I don't know what you're doing, but my name is Patrick Koerbler and joined by fellow BSD staff writer. He's been writing for BSD for 15 years, something crazy like that. You started with Happy Hour Valley, but you've been
That
on
was,
BSD blogs
yes.
here for a while.
Happy Hour Valley was the original. Yes, that was my OG Penn State / college football blog that I started back in 2007. Back when it was a WordPress, back when basically the whole Penn State blogosphere, the whole college football blogosphere was the freaking Wild West.
The Morelli era.
The
What
Morelli,
about
yes.
Anthony Morelli made you want to start a blog? I don't know about that.
I'm a sicko like that, Patrick. That's
okay. Well, anyway, enough about us. So we were previously doing some YouTube shows for Mark Rogers, doing Penn State postgame shows, and we thought, we probably should just start a BSD YouTube account. So that is what we are doing. Plan is for me and Tim and some of the other BSD writers as we go through the season. We'll have other people hop on as well, maybe interview some people around the Penn State blog sphere and Penn State Twitter. But plan for this year is that just like last year, just like we were doing on Mark's channel, we're going to be recapping all the games. So, 5, 10, 15 minutes, kind of just depends. After each Penn State game, myself and Tim and whoever else from BSD will hop on and give our raw reactions, which are, always fun. It's always one game where I take my shirt off and just scream into the camera. So can't wait for that this year. In addition to that, though, what we'll be doing this year is also going on live on Wednesday nights. Tim and I are going to figure it out. We'll see what our schedules are like, but probably go on around 7 o'clock or so on Wednesday nights, just to preview the upcoming game for Penn State. So we'll see on some of those games. I don't know if Kent State's is going to be, all that much in depth of a preview, but we'll hop on Wednesdays and talk all things Penn State football. So thank you for joining us. Subscribe, I guess. I don't know. Just watch it, subscribe, make sure you're reading the website, and we can get into it. So kind of what's going to serve, what we're going to do today is all things Penn State 2024. So we're definitely going to get to the West Virginia game since it's coming up in, just a matter of days. But Tim and I are also going to give our thoughts on the season as a whole, kind of what we're thinking, our season predictions, which did come out on BSD last week. So if you already know what we are kind of thinking going into the season, that's fine, but we'll talk more about it here. So we'll talk about the season, kind of what we think is going to happen with each game. We'll get to the West Virginia game, give our predictions for that, kind of what we expect to see, and then we'll see if we have time later on. We'll go over nationally. So Tim, I'll start with you. What do you have Penn State's record for 2024? And again, we'll go schedule. We'll go game by game, but just right off the top, kind of what are you thinking for Penn State this year?
Well, as I said, if you've read our predictions post already in Black Diaries, I said I was waffling all summer long between 10-2 and 11-1, and I'm ultimately going with 11-1, partially because I'm a nonconformist, but also, I got to be right one of these years picking them to go 11-1, and I know it's been almost 20 years. 2005 is the last time that Penn State got through a regular season got for an entire season plus the postseason with just one loss. And that was, so it's got to happen at some point, though. We're due for it, and the schedule does set up in a way that allows for such a finish, because no longer do they have to play both Ohio State and Michigan in the same year in the schedule. Now, of course, as we'll get into the schedule as we go further in the show, but there are a few potential landmines they do face. I'm thinking namely USC and Wisconsin. Not to mention they got a tough opener at West Virginia coming up this Saturday, which we'll also talk about on this show tonight. And but otherwise, there's only one game that I would just pencil in as a loss at this point. Everything else, Penn State should be a favorite. Maybe they'll be slight favorites in some of them, but they'll be favorites nonetheless. So I think 11-1 is very much on the table. And Again, I believe I was the only one in the predictions post who said 11-1.
A lot of 10-2s.
Everyone else going 10-2, which, I won't be surprised one bit if that's how it ultimately shakes out. But gotta have a little fun here, Pat.
I think the schedule's interesting, right? And you raise a good point because, I think for any Penn State fan that's looking at the schedule, it's okay. Penn State's going into this year, and like you said, there's only one game that they're not going to be favored in or aren't favored in right now, and that's the Ohio State game, which is home game for Penn State, right? So you say compared to last year where they had to go on the road to Ohio State, and they clearly weren't going to be favored against Michigan, considering Michigan just all the success they had in the 2 years prior, and at their success leading into the game in November. This season, they are favored in all but that one game. So despite the fact that, you do have West Virginia on the road, you have USC on the road, you have Wisconsin on the road, those are all games that right now Penn State is favored in. I just personally think that although that's good that Penn State is favored in all those games, and recently James Franklin and Penn State have done a good job of winning the games that they're supposed to win, I think that, there are enough landmines in the schedule to think that, having to go to West Virginia, go to USC, go to Wisconsin, getting Washington. I don't love getting Washington that late in the season. They are bringing in Jed Fish, and they have basically a completely new team. I want to say it's like 21 of 22 players are new starters for them.
They have no returning stars in offense. There are only two returning stars on the defensive side of the ball.
So yeah, there you go. So
transition here.
Yeah, certainly not expecting Washington to be the team that they were last year, but I think that's probably the type of team that you almost wish you got earlier on in the season. But
it is the whiteout, Pat. It is the whiteout game.
True. Yeah, we'll get. I guess we'll save our thoughts for as we go through the schedule a little bit more in depth. But I just think that although you don't have the two heavyweights at the top, as has been the past couple of years in Michigan, Ohio State, I think the depth overall is stronger for Penn State, and I think that's kind of going to be the norm in college football, though. And when you look at the SEC schedules, you look at the Big Ten schedules, it's going to be really hard for the basically not Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, maybe Oregon to Bama, those elite of elites to not get 2 losses, because obviously people have excuse me. Obviously, people make fun of Penn State and James Franklin for going 10-2. I think in this 12-team playoff era and how strong the schedules are going to be, I think Penn State. I know I would be pretty happy with 10-2. Not ecstatic, not jumping out of my seat, and I think Penn State fans obviously would love to finally go 11-1, but I don't think there's any shame in going 10-2 with just how tougher the schedules get just from a depth perspective. But
just make the playoff, and I'm happy.
Yeah. All right. So let's go through the schedule game by game. And again, we'll keep this pretty brief. We don't have to go into the too deep of Purdue and Minnesota, but just to get an idea of kind of where we think the landmines are at and what could be, trickier games than others. So Penn State starts at West Virginia. We'll obviously get to that more in depth later on. So we'll skip that for now. But I think, Tim and I both think that West Virginia is certainly, starting the season in Morgantown, what's going to be, a pretty fired up crowd is not necessarily, ideal, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. So after West Virginia, Penn State comes home for 3 games. Bowling Green and Kent State are their first 2 games on September 7th and then September 21st. So Penn State does get that early bye. Tim, give me 15 minutes on Bowling Green and Kent State. Go ahead. You have the floor.
How about like 15 seconds? Is that better? Just a pair of sacrifices with a bye week sandwiched in between. It'll be welcome though after what will be a tough opener in Morgantown against West Virginia, and then he finished it off with Illinois to end the September slate and what I believe is it's going to be their homecoming game, so they'll be rocking those throwback jersey sorts, which ironically they were also Illinois' homecoming opponent 3 years ago in what ended up being the 2021 Sickos Game of the Year, the 9.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But I think I don't expect a repeat of what happened a few years ago. I think this is a far better Penn State team than the one they trotted out there, especially even if Drew Aller is hurt. I think they have more capable backups ready to throw in there and a better run game than they did back then. And I don't think Illinois is, they don't have the benefit of sneaking up on anybody anymore after the first couple years under Brett Bielema.
Sorry, not to cut you off there, but it is, when you look back at that Illinois team, the two things that they did really well is they ran the ball incredibly well with Chase Brown. Now, I think the Bengals starting running back, and they had, great defenses, and that is not necessarily the case. Illinois really took a step back last year defensively and don't seem to have, that dude at running back the same way that they did with Chase Brown. So hard for Bielema to win when he doesn't have those two things. So yeah, certainly not as scary as they were in 2021. Granted, they probably shouldn't have been that scary, but that's kind of what the Penn State 2021 season was just that type of game.
Yep.
All right. So after Illinois, we go to USC rather comes to Penn State. So that is going to be on October 5th. USC going through a lot of changes themselves. Chip Kelly
I think you got UCLA.
Am I saying USC? Sorry. Yes. UCLA. Too many California teams. Yeah. UCLA. So UCLA is going through a lot of changes themselves with, Chip Kelly ended up leaving UCLA to go be the offense coordinator at Ohio State. They end up hiring Deshaun Foster, former Carolina Panther great and UCLA great. There we go. I keep saying USC. UCLA great. Not too nervous about that one. What do you think about UCLA, Tim?
I mean, I think they're going to finish dead last in the Big Ten. I mean, they're that depleted. They didn't just lose their head coach; they lost their defensive coordinator to their crosstown rival USC, former Nittany Lions safety Danton Lynn, who probably has future head coach written all over him. But he's going to be USC's new defensive coordinator. And so now, UCLA has kind of been scrambling, and they're in for a rough first year in the Big Ten. And so I think really what they're just trying to do is just establish a culture under Deshaun Foster, maybe just try to strike it big in the transfer portal next offseason and, sprinkle in some good recruits too, and hopefully be more competitive in their second year in Big Ten play. But, they're definitely going to take their lumps this year, and Penn State should have very little trouble with this one. So I'm not concerned about UCLA.
Yeah, UCLA as a program, I think is quite intriguing, just because usually think of them as 8-4, 7-5, that type of thing. But I love the uniforms, Jordan Brand. Obviously being in LA, it feels like that they do have like another level that they could potentially reach if they figure some things out NIL wise, and we'll see what the Big Ten move does for them. But yeah, certainly not too worrisome this year, especially with them having to come to Beaver Stadium. That will, more likely than not be Penn State being, double-digit favorites for that one. So sticking with the California teams, Penn State then 7 days later takes their first big West Coast trip. They go to USC, finally, and figuring out the UCLA-USC difference. They go to USC, playing in the Coliseum. It seems like that's going to be a 3:30 kick, because I believe Ohio State and Oregon has already been announced or maybe it has been announced, but I believe Joe Klatt said that that's going to be an 8 o'clock.
I think Klatt leaked it. So.
Yeah, which he's one to do. I think Fox basically gives him permission to do that every once in a while. But so more than likely will be a 3:30 kick, which again, I don't know if that necessarily hurts or helps Penn State, but just kind of interesting that, I don't know, at least for me in like my mind, so I always thought of that Penn State USC game as being an 8 o'clock kick, and it's just kind of funny that it's going to be. But what are your thoughts on this one, Tim? Because when I look at, West Virginia, USC, Wisconsin, I think those are obviously the big three away games that are worrying people. I think USC takes the cake for, at least for me, the one that I think could give Penn State the most trouble. What do you think about USC?
I think you and I are on the same page, and this is the game that had me waffling between 10-2 and 11-1, because even though I said 11-1, this is the win that I'm probably the least confident in picking, but I'm going to say Penn State ekes this one out, maybe by a field goal or no more than a touchdown. But I think it comes down to I still don't fully trust a Lincoln Riley coach team's defense. And yes, I know they're bringing Danton Lynn in. I think they did get a couple of guys from the transfer portal. And I'm sure, look, their defense should be better by virtue of the fact it can't possibly be any worse. But also, their issues weren't just in the defense side of the ball. I mean, offensively last year, too. I mean, I think their offensive line was problematic. I mean, I'm sorry, but there's really no excuse to go 7-5 when Caleb Williams is a starting quarterback. Like that to me is like a red flag. And I've seen some people say Lincoln Riley's a better coach than James Franklin and him overall. And I mean, the only argument I think you could make for that is that he's been to the playoff and Franklin hasn't. But really, when it comes down to other things like defense and just the way he's kind of face planted so far at USC, I still think they'll be. I think they'll be a little better than 7-5, but this strikes me as like an 8-4, 9-3 type of team. I still don't think they're quite good enough in the trenches. But with that being said, one thing you can count on with Lincoln Riley coach teams are a solid, explosive passing attack, which I imagine they will have. So that is a game that will probably test Penn State's secondary the most. And yes, and I'm even saying that with Ohio State on the schedule because I don't know, Will Howard's reputation as a passer isn't quite up to par, not like a CJ Stroud type. But we saw Miller Moss toss 5-6 touchdowns in their bowl game. I'm assuming he's going to be their starter. And so it'll be an interesting matchup. I really think I think my reason for thinking Penn State ekes this one out is I think they ultimately wear them down in the trenches. And I think the defense comes up with a couple more big plays compared to USC's defense, which, again, I'll believe that they're good enough when I see it. But I guess what reason that I'm least confident, this is the pick I'm least confident of all the games I pick in Penn State to win, because the cross-country travel, it's not something Penn State has done mid-season before. And I feel like whenever you introduce a new element like this, the team tends to struggle. And so I don't know. And plus, the last time they beat USC, that was 1996 in the Kickoff Classic in the Meadowlands, the old Giants and Jets Stadium. So I think the last time, I can't even think of the last time they beat USC in Southern California, including the Rose Bowl games. I'd have to do a little research on that one. But
I don't think they've played all that much in LA, but
yeah, I don't think they've ever done it, frankly. I mean, so that would be a first, but there are ways I can see Penn State winning this one, but there's also things that give me pause. But I guess ultimately, I'm picking Penn State. I guess I just trust them a tad more than I trust USC. Like I trust them.
Sorry, not to cut you off, Tim, but I think my worry with USC compared to, like Wisconsin, honestly, even West Virginia, is the type of game that they're going to play. Like West Virginia, and again, we'll get to this a little bit more later on, but right, they're going to want to run the ball, control clock, kind of basically what they did last year in Happy Valley. And same with Wisconsin, even though, Luke Fickell's starting to open things up a little bit with Phil Longo as the offensive coordinator. They're not going to be the Wisconsin teams of old, but Luke Fickell is still, Jim Tressel ball, which is control the clock, good special teams, good defense. USC isn't like that at all. And I think that is, if Penn State and USC play 10 times, maybe Penn State wins 6 times, maybe they win 7 times. But it does just worry me that this being, the first West Coast trip, it's also, right before a bye, coming off the heels of a big, homestand where you're playing 4 games in a row in Beaver Stadium and then having to go to USC. I just think that there's, like you said, there's enough to give you pause there. And if I'm going to pick Penn State to go 10-2, I think that's probably the game that is they're most likely to drop. But we'll see. But certainly, I think Dan Lin, Penn Stater at USC's defensive coordinator, I think will help a bit there. He certainly helped a lot with UCLA, so we'll see what he can do as he makes the trip across Los Angeles to now be at USC. So after that game, though, they get a bye, and then they go to Wisconsin. Worried about Wisconsin at all? Luke Fickell's now going into year 2. He obviously did a great job when he was at Cincinnati of building that program up. What are your thoughts on Penn State going into Camp Randall, which is a place that they oddly have had quite a bit of success when you look back at the last 10 years?
Yeah, well, Penn State has won. They've won the last 5 meetings in a row. The last 4 under James Franklin, and then they beat him a couple. Then they beat him.
It was Bill O'Brien's last game.
Actually, I'm sorry, 6. I think it's 6 in a row. I think off the top of my head. Bill O'Brien beat him twice, and then
2014, 2016.
Yeah, let's see. 2012, 2013, 2016, 2018.
Forgot about 2012.
2021. I'm sorry. Franklin's won the last 3. Bill O'Brien won the 2 prior to that. So 5. They've won the last 5 meetings. The last time Wisconsin beat Penn State, 2011. That was when Russell Wilson was quarterbacking them. And that was, when Penn State was reeling from, that, all that stuff hitting the fan way back when. And so, which we won't get into. But, it's been, the current players in the team were all in elementary school the last time Wisconsin beat Penn State. And, kind of like, it's kind of like the reverse of Ohio State with me. It's at a point like I'll believe Wisconsin beats Penn State when I see it. And I say this realizing it's probably going to be yet another rock fight. Like the last 5 meetings have all been rock fights, been close games at the end. So I expect this to be no different. But I just think Penn State's going to, again, come up with a couple more clutch plays. And they're one of those teams that, Penn State just oddly has had their number. And I think they find a way to pull it out. That's, like I said, USC is the one that I'm, that was the least confident in my picks. But, I'm feeling a little more confidence picking them to beat the Badgers, even though it's at Camp Randall.
Yeah, I just think that they'll play the game that Penn State, kind of like I was saying before with USC, the type of game that Penn State is just more likely to win. Like I think when you look at Penn State and kind of what is going to be the thing that's going to be most likely to upset them, I don't think it's going to be a team that, tries to, slow the game down and tries to run the ball and things like that. Again, I think Luke Fickell is a really good coach, and I think that he does get it figured out at Wisconsin. Like I was saying before, at Cincinnati, his first year they were 4-8, and then his second year they were 11-2. Last year at Wisconsin he was 7-6. So we'll see if maybe they get to 9-3, maybe they go 10-2. But I think in the climate of what the Big Ten is right now, with all these teams joining, that's I think even getting to 8-4, 9-3 would be pretty impressive. I like some of the things Wisconsin's doing. They bring in Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, who has been a frustrating quarterback, but certainly one that's talented. We'll see if they can get things figured out with, again, offense coordinator Phil Longo, who did a lot of good things at North Carolina. But going into Camp Randall is never easy, but I think we're on the same wavelength here with that this should be a Penn State win. After that, Big Ten gifts us Ohio State at home, November 2nd. Will more than likely be a noon kick on good old Fox. Thank you, Big Ten, for putting most of your biggest games at 12 o'clock. We love it. Penn State's probably going to lose, right? You had Penn State at 11-1. I'm guessing that one is more likely than not going to be Ohio State.
Yeah, like I said, at this point, after getting burned on picking Penn State to win last year, after not having picked them to win since 2017, which, we won't get into that game, but I'm firmly black in the I'll believe it when I see it camp as far as Penn State beating Ohio State. Now, of course, does not mean I'm saying Penn State has zero chance. Far from it. Even though this won't be a whiteout because, thanks to the Big Ten allowing Fox to do whatever the hell they want, and Fox being so adamant about putting their top games at noon, tradition be damned. It'll still be a pretty loud, raucous atmosphere. And
my guess is that it's like the helmet stripe game where they literally just have like that one section of blue right in the middle. And
yeah, I
it's
think
what they
it's
did for
one of
Michigan
those.
this year.
It might be this. It's either the stripe out or helmet stripe. I have to look it up again. It's either helmet stripe or stripe out. They're doing something, so it'll be like a pseudo whiteout of sorts at noon. But so it'll still be pretty loud. And we'll see it. It's all gonna come down. I think the key will be can Will Howard make the big time throws? Like we don't know how his. We'll see how he does over the course of the season. Like by that point, we'll know what kind of quarterback he is. His reputation is more of a runner as opposed to being a thrower. But then again, you're at Ohio State and you almost always have the best receiver room in the country at your disposal. And this year is no different. You got Emeka Egbuka, the incoming freshman Jeremiah Smith, who's already been turning heads in practice. So he'll probably take over the Marvin Harrison Jr. role for them. And then their defense should be pretty beastly too, led by Jack Sawyer on the D line. And so, it's going to be a challenge for that, for Andy Kotelnicki's offensive attack. But that's where we'll really get a chance to see how he gets creative, how he tries to work around that Buckeye defense. I think it'll be a competitive game. Penn State usually gives Ohio State a difficult time, but again, I just think the Buckeyes come up with a couple more big plays. It's up to Penn State to, prove me wrong. Show us that you can make those clutch plays in the fourth quarter, or get those clutch stops when you need them the most. So it's an intriguing game, even though I think Ohio State wins. I said in 2016 that Penn State had zero chance, and look what happened there. So you never know, but that's the one game I'm pegging as a loss.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, as they've have pretty much said, they spent like $20 million or whatever it is on this roster, getting Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss and getting Will Howard from Kansas State and getting Seth McLaughlin from Alabama, the center, and getting Caleb Downs, probably the best safety in the country, a guy who I think if he could have entered the NFL draft last year is probably still a first round pick, coming out as a true freshman. So they're stacked. We'll talk a little bit more later about kind of what we're thinking nationally, but I think rightfully so, everybody in the Big Ten is thinking that it's Ohio State or Oregon as the two teams that are most likely to win the Big Ten, and probably the two most likely teams from the Big Ten to potentially win a national championship. And that is for good reason. And for Penn State and James Franklin, like they absolutely don't deserve anyone to think that they are going to win this game, because they've had ample opportunity. When you look at 2018 or 2017, 2018, those are two games that they should have won. 2019, that was another stacked Ohio State team, and Penn State played well, but so we won't give them too much there. But 2021, played really well. 2022, they're in the lead in the fourth quarter. Obviously, last year was just gross and disgusting, and I hate myself that I drove all the way out to Ohio to watch that. But it's just that, like, they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt of they're coming into Beaver Stadium, hostile environment. It is the helmet game, by the way. it was confirmed by Penn State. Ohio State just always finds a way to win. Same way that like Penn State fans look at Rutgers or Maryland. Like that's honestly how Ohio State fans view Penn State. And whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that is.
I mean, rightfully so. You know?
When you win the way they've had the last 7 games, 7 years. So yeah, I think Penn State is certainly in. We're not going to believe until they prove it mode against Ohio State. So rightfully, probably going to be a loss. Talked about Washington a little bit earlier. They, lost basically almost their, entire starting unit. They get Jed Fish from Arizona. I do like Jed Fish. I think he's a pretty good coach. Probably not going to be kind of similar. I don't say similar to UCLA because I think that Washington is more talented, and I wouldn't be shocked if Washington goes like 6-6 or 7-5. And as I was saying before, I think this is the type of team that you kind of wish you got earlier in the season before they can kind of figure things out. But what are your thoughts on Washington, Tim? You worried about this game? Kind of where does it fall on, what you think could potentially be an issue for Penn State?
Well, actually, I have the opposite take, Pat. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they're 6-6, 7-5. They've just, I mean, if I could show a GIF right now to illustrate Washington football, it would be that, from that series finale of Fresh Prince, where Will Smith walks into the empty living area. All the couches are gone. It's just there's a rug in the corner, and just looking around. That's Washington football right now. So it's a blank slate. Jed Fish obviously proved himself in Arizona. I'm kind of surprised he took this job, especially considering Billy Napier is on a scorching hot seat at Florida and may very likely lose his job after this season. But he's got a major transition task ahead of him. He'll be helped by getting Will Rogers, the quarterback from Mississippi State, who's thrown for 12,000 career yards from Mike Leach's system down there. But they, like I said before, they're bringing no returning starters on offense. It's a completely new offense. Only 2 stars returned on defense. And for a defense that was, they were good. I mean, they weren't like spectacular, but obviously good enough, to allow the offense to put up enough points to win games. But, I'm looking at the schedule. So it starts off easy enough. You host Weber State and Eastern Michigan. Those should be wins. They play Washington State at Lumen Field. It's a Seahawks stadium. And I don't know how Wazoo is this year, but, that I'll just say, let's just say they win that just for this exercise's sake. Then they get Northwestern at home, which, Northwestern was a nice story last year in David Braun, but I think they take a big step back in a year or two. So see they win at home, but then after that, they have to go play. They have to go cross country and play at Rutgers on Friday night, and playing there on the road and against the Rutgers team, they're going to be a feisty bunch. I think Rutgers should be a solid 7, maybe 8-win bowl team this year, and going all the way out there to play them on a Friday night. That's going to be a difficult one for a brand new roster, and also it'd be their first road game of the year, really. So I could see them dropping that. Then they get Michigan at home the following week, and I know Michigan's lost a lot on offense, especially at quarterback, but they've got enough dudes still to, especially on defense, to give them a hard time. So I could see them dropping that. Then they have to go on the road the following week to Iowa. And, as we know, Kinnick Stadium, that's where opposing teams tend to go to die a lot of times. So I could definitely see them dropping that. And they get a bye week. Then they have to go on the road again to Indiana. And although I don't think Indiana is going to be anything special, I do think they should be improved under Kurt Signetti in his first year. I think they'll be flirting with bowl game. So, again, that's a game they could potentially drop too. And then they go back home, they host USC, and that could be like a 50-50 type game, but again, losable. Then they got to go on the road to Penn State the following week, which I think they're definitely going to lose. Question is by how much. This is the whiteout game, by the way. So it doesn't matter if it's going to be 3:30 or 7:30. Even if it's a 3:30 start, it's going to get dark by the second quarter. So it's effectively going to be a night whiteout either way. And it'll be a nice little way of welcoming a new fellow conference member into the Big Ten. So team dropping that. They get UCLA at home the following week. So I think they win that. I think UCLA is the worst team in the Big Ten. But but you see, that's only about 5 wins I've ticked off. And then their last game of the regular season after a bye week is at Oregon. So, I'm thinking this is like a 5 to 7 win Washington team, frankly. Maybe they'll be slightly better and get 8 wins, but I don't think they're going to be all that great this year. So I think this is a game where Penn State can kind of name its number and how much they're going to beat them.
I did not expect a game-by-game breakdown of the Washington football schedule. That's what we're bringing to you on the BSD Penn State football preview show. I think Washington will be, I think they'll be a solid team, but certainly nothing that is going to worry Penn State too much. And like you said, whiteout game, Penn State does pretty well when they're not playing not Ohio State in the whiteout. After that, going back to Penn State's schedule, we have at Purdue and then at Minnesota. I think both of those games we have ticked off as wins. Yes, Tim?
Yes. And I know some people watch just be like, hey, remember the last time we went to Minnesota and got beat? Yes, but that was 5 years ago. This Minnesota team is not nearly as good as that team was. Rashad Bateman's not walking for that door. Tanner Morgan's not walking for that door. And yes, I know they brought in a transfer from the FCS level, Max Brosmer, who they have some high expectations for, but that's quite a leap to make from New Hampshire to Minnesota. And again, I'll believe he's that good when I see it. I think more importantly, I think Penn State's secondary is light years beyond what it was in 2019. Like, I don't anticipate them getting. I still have visions of our secondary just getting constantly burned by Rashad Bateman and whoever else was catching deep balls for Minnesota that day. But I don't envision a repeat of that. Purdue, they're kind of riding the struggle bus right now. And, maybe they'll be a little better in year 2 under Ryan Walters, but I don't see them posing a problem like they did a couple of years ago when Penn State opened the season at Purdue. So I chalk those 2 up as wins.
Then Penn State finishes at home with Maryland. Maryland's new starting quarterback, since Talia is off to, I don't think he made an NFL roster. But new starting quarterback, offensive line that needs, a lot of help. So it's certainly not shaping up to be like one of Mike Locksley's better years. But for as much as Penn State fans and Penn State at large kind of makes fun of Maryland, I think Mike Locksley, all in all, has done a pretty good job down there. They're usually making bowl games, and certainly I think they're pretty happy about no longer having to be in the Big Ten East. Just getting stuck with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State every year. So. Still, that being said, certainly don't think that Maryland will cause much of an issue for Penn State this year. They're pretty far down on the am I worried about them list.
No, and like I said, as long as James Franklin's the head coach at Penn State, I think you don't have to worry about them not getting up to play Maryland whenever they're on the schedule, especially considering a good chunk of this roster is from the state of Maryland or from the DMV area, as we call it, as us DC area locals call it, DMV being short for DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So, those guys will want to show up and represent. So I think, yeah, I'm not worried about this one. I mean, Talia's gone. I think their starters, North Carolina State transfer MJ Morris.
Mm-hmm.
What's his? I think Roman Hemi's back at running back. Solid back, but Penn State's I think held him in check when they played against him, and really it comes down to just Penn State just has a superior advantage in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They've been able to push them around and pound the rock or give Drew Auer time to throw the ball. And, and then defensively, they're able to swallow up the ground game and, and they were just having Talia running for his life for a good chunk of the game, and also bait him into making some bad throws. So I just don't see how this year's going to be different, especially considering it's the last game of the year. By that point, hopefully Penn State is, at the very least sitting at 9-2 and needing to win this to solidify another 10-win season and perhaps solidify an at-large bid to their first ever college football playoff appearance. So could be a lot more at stake than simply just beating up on Maryland in this one. So we'll see. But like you, Pat, I'm not worried about this one bit.
Yeah, and I think you raised a good point with the expansion of the playoff that if Penn State is 9-2 compared to previous years where they're not necessarily. I mean, they're playing for New Year's Six Bowl, but obviously teams were caring less and less about that. I mean, you saw how many kids at Penn State and kids all across the country were opting out of those bowl games. So don't think they were exactly juiced up going to the Maryland game saying, hey, let's make it to the Cotton Bowl, fellas. But I certainly hope and think that the playoff will mean a lot more for all those guys. So that is a good point that even if Penn State is 9-2, that game could be more meaningful than necessarily has been in the past. But let's go back to the start to finish up since we skipped over West Virginia because, as we said before, we're just a few days away from Penn State kicking off against West Virginia at 12 o'clock. It's on Fox, right? I'm not getting confused with all the different networks that Penn State should be on. Yes. On Fox, Penn State going to West Virginia. Give me your general thoughts. What scale? Okay, first and foremost, first question. Scale 1 to 10, how much does this game worry you? 10 being, Ohio State, 1 being Kent State. Where does this kind of fall in line on your worry scale?
I think I put it at about a 6 or 7. It's like I said, that'll be a raucous environment in Morgantown. And
what was West Virginia for you last year going into the game? Obviously, different being that it was a home game.
Yeah, last year I would have put it at maybe a 3.
I was gonna say I was like a 2. Like I wasn't.
Yeah, I was like a 3. I wasn't too worried. I mean, and frankly, I mean, the West Virginia fans last year on the internet, they were all pretty much resigned to a loss. Although some were optimistic they could, keep it close for a while. And to their credit, they did keep it close for about 3 quarters until Penn State pulled away. And this year it's a lot different. Most of the West Virginia fans on the internet are predicting they'll pull off the upset. And, they're all convinced that Drew Auer sucks, even though he threw for over 300 yards and a few touchdowns on them last year.
Yeah, maybe his best game. I mean, you and I came on here after that game. And, I mean, I won't speak for you, but I know I was like, he's the guy. He is it.
I was thinking similar things probably. I mean, that first touchdown throw to Kendra Lambert-Smith, had us thinking, no, this might be what we need to topple Ohio State and Michigan. So, Those are fun times.
The
So
spread for this season, by the way, just wanted to mention, spread for this season is going in the opposite direction. I don't know where exactly it opened up at, but I do know is that minus 10.5 for Penn State for quite a bit. It jumped down to minus 9.5 and minus 9. I saw on Twitter earlier today, and today being Tuesday, August 27th, that it went down to minus 7.5. I see on DraftKings, I'm just using DraftKings, that's the one that I use. It's at minus 8. So still seems like money is coming in on West Virginia. Now, whether people actually think that West Virginia pulls off the upset or not, or if it's just kind of, the smart money because of all the, different factors that West Virginia could potentially pull off the upset. But it is moving in the direction that, people seem to be putting the money on West Virginia. Not that that means anything, but why do we think that's the case though, right? So let's put ourselves in that position of, you said on a scale of 1 to 10, you were about a 6 or a 7. I think I'm about the same thing as well, just opening the season in a tough environment like that. What makes you nervous about this game? What does West Virginia do that could have them pulling off the upset? Or what does Penn State not do?
They bring a solid running game. They're C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White, solid 1-2 running combination. And then their quarterback, Garrett Green, maybe not the best thrower. I think only like 53% completion rate last year, but a solid runner. If he was kind of slippery last year from what I recall.
Poor man's Trace McSorley, some are saying.
Poor man Trace, yeah. I mean, but you know what? If he's able to scamper to first downs on some 3rd and long situations when Penn State brings a pressure but isn't able to get home and he escapes, that could make for an interesting game, and give them a chance at the upset. But it's stuff like that. And of course, this is the first game for having 3 new coordinators for Penn State. Now, granted, I've read a lot of things about James Franklin saying in press conferences that some new rules have made the transition a lot easier for them. They feel more comfortable going into the first game than they normally would under, previous rules. So, and Andy Kolnick is no stranger to this West Virginia defense, having coached against them the last few years at Kansas. And he's lit them up pretty good at times. I think 2022, they put up 55 points on West Virginia. I'd have to let's look this up.
While you're looking that up, just to go back to West Virginia's, rushing game, I think obviously a lot of people are talking about their running backs and
55-42. That was a score in 2022.
I think a lot of people are talking about those West Virginia running backs, and obviously that's going to be West Virginia's game plan, just like it was last year, to run the ball and to bleed some of the clock and basically keep the ball out of Penn State's hand, and hopefully you tire that Penn State defense, despite the fact that I think defensive tackle is one of Penn State's strongest units, one of Penn State's strongest positions, with Hakeem Beamon and Devon Ellie's now Devon J. Thomas, and Zane Durant and Keziah Izzard and Caleb Artis and Alonzo Ford, the transfer from Old Dominion, who is back from injury. So Penn State goes, certainly 2 deep, and I think they could even go into that 3 deep with Ford and Artis. But I think the key for West Virginia, and you kind of mentioned it, is going to be Garrett Green just keeping things alive. And I said, poor man's Trace McSorley earlier, and despite the fact maybe that sounds kind of like a dig. I mean, coming from me comparing anyone to Trace McSorley, it's like the greatest honor in the world, perhaps. So saying poor man's Trace McSorley certainly isn't bad, but he's just like that annoying, like this, the classic annoying quarterback that, like, in 2003, it felt like he was, the type of guy that was in college for like 8 years. Like he put him on like Oklahoma State in like 2003. He's like a perfect fit there. That kind of is the type of quarterback that Garrett Green is, because he's not extremely efficient as a passer. He's only 5'11", but plays a lot, plays alive with his legs, and just has a knack for, making a big play and getting a first down, kind of similar to Trace. So I think for Penn State, making sure that you don't let him run wild is going to be really important. As high as I am on Abdul Carter, I am greatly concerned that he's going to be too aggressive and rush his way out of a play and just allow a perfect lane for Green to pick up 7 yards instead of, keeping him in the pocket and not letting him get loose. So I think that's the most, I don't want to say nerve wracking because it's not exactly nerve wracking, but the biggest cause for concern. What do we think about Drew Aller going into this game? What are our thoughts on, the Penn State offense and Andy Kotelnicki, but in particular, what does Drew have to do for Penn State to win this game?
Well, I think, just like last year, just not, just not make any dumb mistakes. Don't throw any, don't turn it over, which he didn't do last year. And he's, to be fair, he did a pretty good job all last year not turning it over. But I think you're going to see, I'm going to see a guy who's more comfortable out there. There's a reason he was named a captain this year on the team. He's been more vocal. And I think he seems to respond a lot better to a guy like Kotelnicki. I think he's going to be more encouraged to take some more shots downfield and not just constantly check down to the safe throw like he was doing last year.
Well, that's the tough part, right? Like on one hand, and I agree with you. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but it's kind of where Penn State has to pick its poison. Where on one hand, just like last year, we go into these games with Drew to start the season, and it was, just let him get his feet wet. Don't put too much on his plate. Don't turn the ball over. Don't, you don't have to win the games, just don't lose the games. But then when you go to Ohio State and all of a sudden, hey, Drew, sorry, you need to throw the ball 42 times. And that's just really, really tough to ask of someone, to not have to, do it all and be the face of the offense and be, kind of the engine, but then going into the biggest games, kind of having to make that switch. So I think even for this West Virginia game, and again, I agree with you. I think the ideal world is that you lean on Nick Singleton and you lean on Katron Allen and you lean on Tyler Warren, safe throws to Tyler Warren and let him do some, do dirty work. But at the same time, do we want to get into that same rhythm with Drew that we did last year of not putting enough on his plate?
I think they'll put more. I think it'll be more on his plate this year. And I was watching another podcast or reading some, but apparently they've been working on RPO plays where Drew designed for Drew to keep the ball and run. So they are going to feature Drew as a runner in Andy Kotelnicki's system and make defenses have to respect his legs. Now, like I said, no one's going to mistake him for, being like Michael Vick, but he's not exactly, we saw last year, he's not exactly a statue either. I mean, he can run and pick up some yardage when need be. So if he can, establish himself as more of a threat in that regards, it will make defense have to respect that. And that in turn opens up other aspects of the offense. And we also know Kotelnicki is a guy who loves him. He does a lot of pre-snap motion, a lot of weird alignments. I think he's going to throw some of those at West Virginia's defense, which frankly, it's quite mid. They weren't so hot last year. They frankly don't seem like they're going to be any better this year. Which brings me to my next point. One of their starting cornerbacks, actually, they have both their starting quarterbacks are transfers. One from Duquesne, Aiden Garnes, and another one from Northwestern, Garnett Hollis Jr., who infamously made comments in a press conference last week about how Penn State doesn't respect anyone besides Ohio State and Michigan, how they were running the exact same plays against Northwestern they were running in week 1 and against West Virginia, and how they were going to punch ready to hit them in the mouth. And, if you don't think that there's been constant reminders of those comments in the Lash building, like printing them out, putting them on the just random spots, you're just you're living in a fantasy world. I think the players are gonna remember those comments, and I think they're ready to make them eat their own words in those regards. So, I mean, I think Drew can frankly cook against this secondary, which still looks pretty suspect. Their best guy defensively is defensive end Sean Martin. Like he's the one guy who I think could give them some potential trouble, especially since the offensive line for Penn State's lost a few starters. They got some good depth coming up, but first game without a few starters. We'll see how.
Especially at offensive tackle. I think interior we feel pretty good with, right? The guards. But yeah, I think offensive tackle, despite the fact that, Drew Shelton, was certainly good when he was a true freshman, when he stepped in for Alu, but, wasn't quite the same last year and kind of a backup role. And yeah, we'll see what happens with Anthony Doko and Nolan Rucci at right tackle. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with West Virginia as far as, defensively. I think it's that, their defensive line, it's not, certainly not going to be mistaken for a bunch of future NFL players, but certainly really good college players or good, solid college players that, like you said, could give Penn State some trouble on the offensive line as they're trying to figure things out and break things in. So you said, scale 1 to 10, it was like a 6 or a 7 as far as, your worry. What is your score prediction for Penn State going into Morgantown? Do you think that they are able to get out unscathed?
I think they get out with the win. I'm saying 31-17 Penn State. I think it's
Penn
a
State
close.
covers.
I think they cover. Ultimately, they cover. It's going to be close for 3 quarters. I wouldn't be surprised if West Virginia leads early on, or if it's maybe they're even ahead at halftime, or it's a tie game, or Penn State narrowly has the lead. But I think Penn State is still the superior team from a talent and depth standpoint. And I think that's going to show up in the fourth quarter and allow them to make a couple big plays on both sides of the ball and ultimately pull away in this one and cover the spread.
I kind of view this game as I did. I mean, I was worried about Wisconsin, obviously, going into 2021. They were ranked at that point. But I would say this is probably maybe a little bit more like Purdue. The only difference is that Penn State is, going into that 2022 season, Penn State was not ranked as far as I remember. And obviously this year they come in with, a top 10 ranking. But I just don't think that it's going to be easy, right? And not that it should be either, right? There's a reason that Penn State is only 8-point favorite, and going into Morgantown, a hostile environment to open the season. I personally would much rather start with Idaho, like we did in, what was that, 2019, right? Yeah, this is Clifford's first year. 77-0. Like all the running backs scored touchdowns. 7 Ford, like his third carry of the game, he went like 78 yards. It was great, beautiful. It was like an NCAA video game. I would much rather that than this, but I obviously do think that Penn State wins. It's weird because as it's creeping down, as that number is creeping down from 10.5 to 8, I have a rule not to big gamble on Penn State because I'm not capable of not being biased. But if it's 8, I guess I do think that Penn State covers. I have like somewhere in the realm of like 27-16 or like 26-17. Like it's gonna be a weird score. One of the two teams is gonna like not have like that perfect like 24-17 type score. But yeah, I honestly just think that West Virginia just doesn't quite have the weapons offensively. Again, it goes back to kind of what we were saying earlier when we talk about that, West Virginia, USC, Wisconsin, trio of games that are road games and what's going to cause Penn State issues. And when I think of, a spread out offense that has, Zachariah Branch, that worries me and I think causes Penn State more issues than, as good as CJ Johnson is, him trying to run into the middle of Penn State's defense, which, I think is going to be pretty good with the aforementioned defensive tackles and, Denai Dennison at defensive end and Amin Vanover coming in and Kobe King and Tony Rojas, Jaden Reed coming down from safety. So I just think that it's a pretty good matchup, all things considered, for Penn State, where West Virginia's strength, which is going to probably help them in a lot of Big 12 games, right? Again, no offense to the Big 12 teams, but certainly not known for their defense. So I do have Penn State winning, and maybe if we had to give it like a grade of like what I think the win looks like, I'm going to say it's probably going to be like a B, maybe like a B minus, where I don't think anyone's going to leave this game thinking any differently about Penn State than they did coming into the season, right? If you think that they're this 10-2, sort of bubble playoff team, then that's going to continue to happen. If you still have faith in them, right? Like yourself going 11-1, you go into Morgantown and you get a win, you're happy with that. So, oddly enough, I don't think we learn all that much about Penn State. I think it kind of goes how, I don't want to say most people expect, but kind of how you would think it goes. If we simulated this game, 100 times, I think it's going to kind of go like that. So any other thoughts on West Virginia before we move on nationally?
Well, it's more just like an observation, but it's crazy how game week snuck up on us.
How are you? I guess we can delve into this. We'll kind of go into like the national scale as well, but how are you with the changes in college football? I mean, right, like NIL and the transfer portal, and now this 12-team playoff, and like I just know for me this year, like getting the Athlon, or I think it's called Lindy's magazine. It was just, I feel like this year compared to so many years past, it was every single preview of the team was like they returned 3 starters, but their right tackle who started 2 years at North Texas, and they lose their left tackle who went to Georgia, but they get this left tackle from Michigan State. Like, as it's just college football is coming more and more foreign to me, and I'm not saying that I'm not like looking forward to the season, because I completely am, and college football is still my favorite, but I can certainly say this is probably the least, I don't want to say excited, but like you said, it kind of has snuck up on me. Whereas in the past, it's like I was literally, counting down the days until, that first, I don't really, week 0 is a little whatever. Even this year was certainly, Florida State, Georgia Tech, I guess, was okay. But I'm just, I can't say I'm quite as excited. But how are you? Are you kind of looking at that the same way, like nationally and Penn State wise, or do you still kind of have that true love for college football that you did when you were like 12 or 13 years old?
I mean, I think this is probably it's hard for me to think of another offseason where I wasn't as engaged in just constantly reading up on college football news or Penn State news. I mean, I guess, kind of like just as a reflex, like, every day I'm just randomly go check out Lions 24/7 or maybe the On3 boards and see what's up. But as far as keeping up with like day-to-day stuff and Penn State, I mean, don't get me started on recruiting. Like I've fallen off the wagon with recruiting. Like,
I used to follow recruiting. Like, if going back to like 2018, I probably could have named like 200 prospects that Penn State was either, they offered, or they had visited, or they were camping or stuff like that. And this year with, we obviously have to write commitment articles, and when we find out that someone's going to commit, like half of them, I'm like, who's this guy? Like literally the first time hearing of them. It's just, it's tough to get into it, because it's like look at someone like King Mack, for example, right? He comes into Penn State as a highly touted, I think Fort Lauderdale kid, 4-star, top 200 kid, is here for 1 year, red shirts, hear all good things, and then going to Bama, like just it's tough to really buy in when you don't know who's going to be around and who's not. And how that differs from pro sports is that, at least with pro sports, it's like they have, contracts that generally keep them around. And of course, yes, you can have a player like in the NBA that forces a move, or you have, players get traded and things like that. But, by and large, you look at the Eagles, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, right? Like all your main guys are generally there. And certainly when they're not changing in the middle of the season the same way that they are, in college with after spring practice, which I don't know. I just, I'm excited. I will be on my couch on Saturday from 9 a.m. until probably like 2 a.m. watching all, different college football and watching post-game shows and stuff like that. So it certainly isn't like I'm out on the sport at all. It's still my favorite, but I did find it was more challenging to follow hardcore this year. And maybe that's also about Penn State, because I was so in on Penn State last year into talking myself into this being the year, 2023 being the year. And then when they, just looked pathetic, I don't know if that killed a little part of me, but yeah. Anyway, let's we're over an hour here, so we're really going long first episode, but put you on the spot here. Who do you have win the national championship, Tim? Or give me 4 teams. Give me 4 teams you like, and then I'll give you 4 teams that I like, and then we can pick who we have as our winner.
I mean, the first 2 are obvious. I think I like Georgia and Ohio State to, be in that Final Four. And also, I'd say look out for Oregon and Texas.
That's literally the same 4 teams I was.
I'm getting really creative here,
Yeah, no, I mean that's, and this is the thing though, that this is kind of where the sport has gone, where you take whoever you think the 2 best SEC teams are and the 2 best Big Ten teams are, and that's kind of it, right? I mean, even saw with the ACC with Florida State and Georgia Tech, that like Florida State was one of those teams that I think was like a trendy pick of. They recruit as well as the SEC, and they do pretty well with NIL and in the transfer portal, and then they go and they lose to Georgia Tech. So, yeah, I kind of think the same. I think if I had to pick 4 teams, I would go Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, and I was going to say Texas. Certainly intrigued by Alabama this year with Kellen DeBoer, but I think he might need at least another year. They're recruiting extremely well, by the way, despite the fact that Saban is gone, DeBoer is picked up. I know that was one of the questions for him, but he's doing quite well. Who do you like out of those 4 then, right? If we're going to say that we think the Final Four is Georgia, Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, and not knowing exactly what the matchups are, but who do you like? Who would you put as the favorite? Because I think I'd go with Oregon. I really do. As strong as I think Ohio State is, and obviously as good as Georgia and Texas are, I really like what Oregon's doing, and they just have different level NIL, and have done a great job of getting guys in the portal of whoever they want, and getting Dylan Gabriel. I think certainly up there for best quarterback. I think it's probably be between him, Carson Beck, and Quinn Ewers. So I kind of like Oregon if I had to pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, but I don't know. I wouldn't bet against. I don't know if I bet against Georgia. I know they, last year, they missed out on the playoff because they just didn't get it done in the SEC title game against Alabama. But as long as Kirby Smart's there, they're going to be a pretty lethal team. And I mean, Ohio State. I mean, I know they spent $20 million on NIL to grab the best guys they could out of the portal, but I guess I don't fully trust Will Howard to be the guy who can get them over the top. I mean, I think Carson Beck's probably. I trust Carson Beck more. I'm assuming that's their starter at Georgia. I think Georgia's just stacked at every single position you can think of.
Yeah, I certainly like, as far as Ohio State goes, I certainly like Will Howard's fit with Chip Kelly more than I did Bill O'Brien. As much as I did love Bill O'Brien, I was slightly disappointed when he left and they got Chip Kelly, because that just felt like more of a natural fit. Not that I think, Chip Kelly this is pretty crazy to say, but not that I'm extremely worried about Chip Kelly offenses, just because I think that I don't want to say that he's like just an old guy. Now the game has passed him by, but right, it's not like 2012 where he's on the the cutting edge of innovation offensively.
No, other programs have caught up, and you have other evolved offenses taken over,
doing what he had always been doing. But if there's one thing Chip knows how to do, it's create an offense, especially one that is strong, that has a strong running game, and with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Junkins, and that's why I think, Will Howard is certainly a capable runner that Ohio State's gonna be really good. But I don't know. I kind of just think that this is the year for Oregon, that Dan Lanning kind of gets over the hump, and they've accumulated a lot of good talent, and to have Dylan Gabriel and all the guys that they do. So I'll go with Oregon. You have to make a pick. You're going with Georgia?
I'm going Georgia to win it
Okay.
all.
All right. Georgia, Oregon, you heard it here first. You obviously have Penn State in the playoff, right? At 11-1.
I have Penn State in the playoff. Yeah, 11-1, definitely in the playoff. I mean, that's 11-1 would probably have them seated high enough to host a playoff game at Beaver Stadium. So,
ideal Penn State first round playoff matchup. Who would you like to come to Beaver Stadium? Because I think that is the thing. As much as I am I'm such like a purist that if you gave me the 12-team playoff, or if we could just go back to the olden days of have the AP voters decide who wins the national championship, I almost would rather just have the AP voters decide. But that being the case, those first round playoff matchups are going to be a lot of fun. So I will give them credit for that. I think I would love Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame would be.
Yeah, that's one. I don't know. Maybe some southern, maybe like Texas A&M or Miami could be interesting. Get a
LSU,
get a team from down south to have to go to Central PA right around Christmas time and
get a real whiteout
cold, or maybe it snowed. I still think back to that. What was it, the pandemic season when they played Illinois the week before Christmas, and I remember it snowed like 8 inches in State College, and so they had pushed all the snow aside, but it made for a nice atmosphere. So maybe we'll
do you remember it was literally 2000, 2001. I think it might have been the Birmingham Bowl or something like that. It was on I was around New Year's Eve. I want to say it was Texas A&M, Mississippi State.
Oh, yes. It was
massive amount of snow. I remember as a kid being this is the coolest thing in the world. That is what I want.
Yeah, I think I was in high school, and I was watching that.
If LSU or Alabama comes to Penn State for a playoff game, that is if there are football gods, if the football gods exist, that is what they will give us. But I would very excited about the first round playoff matchups. Penn State in it or not will be really exciting. All right. I think we hit everything. We went well over an hour and 12 minutes. So a lot of content. Once again, just a reminder that we will be here. Plan is to do preview shows on Wednesday, probably around 7 o'clock, and we'll be doing them live. The only reason we did do this live is that we did this at started at 9:15, so it's just a little bit too late to do it live. But the rest of these shows will be live. So Wednesdays at 7, we'll be doing game previews. And then Saturdays, right after the game, 5-10 minutes after the game, Tim and I or someone from BSD will be on to give our live reactions to whatever Penn State, whatever happens in the Penn State game. So Tim, thank you for joining us. And for everyone out there listening or I guess watching, since this is really going to be on YouTube, thank you for joining. Make sure you keep coming back. Make sure you're reading the site, blackshoediaries.com, and subscribe if you can. So thank you so much, and we will see you Saturday after the West Virginia game. Hopefully my shirt is on and Penn State is victorious.